The lamp on the mantel had not been lit in 94 days, not since the morning Mary helped her father wrap her mother's blue ribbon around the wick and whisper goodbye to the flame that had welcomed visitors for 7 years. Mary remembered that morning with the peculiar clarity that sometimes came to children who had seen too much too soon. The way the ribbon had fluttered once before settling into stillness. The way her father's hands had trembled as he lowered the glass chimney. The way he had said, his voice cracking like ice over the creek, that light invited people in, and he was not ready for people anymore. She had accepted this the way children accept things that make no sense, because her father had said it, and her father was everything she had left, and if he needed the darkness, then she would learn to live in it too. But tonight, tonight the wind screamed against the cabin walls like something hungry and desperate, and Mary crouched on the staircase with her knees pressed to her chest, watching the door shake and rattle in its frame, wondering if the whole world was trying to come inside. The door burst open. Snow swirled into the room like a living thing, white and wild and cold beyond anything Mary had ever felt, and behind the snow came 3 small figures dragging something heavy between them, and it took Mary a long moment, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, to understand that the heavy thing was a person, a woman, limp and ice-crusted and barely breathing. "Papa!" Mary screamed, forgetting that she was supposed to be asleep, forgetting everything except the terror of seeing someone so still and white. Her father appeared from the back room, moving faster than she had seen him move in 3 years, and he crossed the cabin in 4 strides and lifted the woman from the children's arms, as if she weighed nothing at all. And the children, 2 boys and a girl, all of them shaking, all of them with eyes too big for their thin faces, collapsed against the wall like puppets with cut strings. And then something happened that Mary would remember for the rest of her life. The lamp flickered, just once. A single tremor of light behind the cold glass, as if something was waking up, and her father stopped, the woman still in his arms, snow melting in his dark hair, and stared at the mantel with an expression Mary could not name, something between grief and wonder and fear. Then he turned away and carried the woman to the settee, and Mary scrambled down the stairs to help, and the lamp stayed dark, but she had seen it. She had seen it. The woman's name was Hannah Smith. That was what she said the next morning, anyway, when she woke on the settee beneath 4 of Mary's mother's quilts and looked around the cabin with eyes that held something guarded and careful and afraid. "Hannah Smith," she said, and Mary, who was sitting on the floor beside the fire, watching her, noticed the pause between the first name and the second, the tiny hesitation that felt like a missed step on a stair. Her father noticed it too. Mary could tell by the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went flat and distant, the way they always did when he was thinking about something he would not say out loud. "I'm Caleb Carson," her father said, not offering his hand, not looking at the woman directly. "This is my daughter Mary. That's your children, I expect." The 3 children were huddled near the stove, eating the oatmeal Mary had helped her father make at dawn. The oldest boy, 12 maybe, with shoulders that were trying to be broader than his ears, watched Caleb with suspicious eyes. The girl sat beside him, her hand on the youngest boy's arm, as if she was afraid someone might try to take him away. "Jacob, Emma, and Daniel," Hannah said, and her voice cracked a little on the last name, and she counted her children with her eyes the way Mary had seen mothers count chickens before a storm. "I need to thank you for taking us in. We would have died out there." "You nearly did," Caleb said. 18 degrees below zero last night. 14 minutes in that wind without shelter and your blood starts to freeze. You were close." Hannah flinched at the number, and Mary saw her hands tighten on the quilt, and she thought, with that strange intuition children sometimes have, that this woman had been running from something, and the cold had almost caught her. The cabin door opened, letting in a blast of frozen air and a figure bundled in so many layers of wool and fur that it took Mary a moment to recognize Mrs. Harlow from the ranch half a mile east. "Caleb Carson," Mrs. Harlow said, stamping snow from her snowshoes and unwinding her scarf. "I saw smoke from your chimney this morning and I had to come see if my old eyes were playing tricks. 3 years you've let that stove go cold most days, and now—" "Oh!" She stopped, seeing Hannah and the children, and her weathered face shifted through surprise and curiosity and something that looked almost like hope. "Well," she said, well. "They came in from the storm last night," Caleb said, his voice flat. "They'll be staying until the roads clear." "The roads won't clear for 2 weeks. Minimum," Mrs. Harlow said. "Storms settled in like it means to stay. I've been through 40 winters in this territory, and I know the look of one that's got business to finish." She turned to Hannah with a smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. "I'm Agnes Harlow. My husband passed 8 years ago, so I understand something about weathering storms alone." "Hannah Smith," Hannah said, and there was that pause again. Mrs. Harlow's eyes narrowed slightly, but she only nodded and turned to Caleb. "You'll need supplies," she said. "That root cellar of yours hasn't been properly stocked since." She stopped herself, but Mary knew what she had been about to say. "Since Mama died. Well, you'll need to take inventory." "I know what I have," Caleb said. "Do you?" Mrs. Harlow pulled off her mittens and moved to warm her hands by the fire. "A full root cellar feeds the body, Caleb, but opening your door feeds the soul. Both keep you alive through winter. Your Martha knew that." Mary watched her father's face close like a door slamming shut, and she felt the familiar ache in her chest, the one that came whenever someone said her mother's name and her father looked like he was dying all over again. "I need to check the animals," Caleb said, and he was out the door before Mrs. Harlow could respond. The storm grew worse. On the 3rd day, the snow piled so high against the cabin walls that the windows on the east side disappeared entirely, and the world outside became nothing but white and wind and cold, and Mary began to understand, with a sick feeling in her stomach, that they were trapped. 7 people in a cabin meant for 2. She watched her father's face when he came back from checking the root cellar, and she saw the tightness around his eyes, the way he counted and recounted on his fingers, the way he stood very still for a long moment before going to stoke the fire. Anna saw it too. "I can't stay here and eat your food," she said that evening, when the children were asleep and Mary was pretending to be. "We'll find another way. The church in town has a shelter for—" "In this storm?" Caleb's voice was hard. "You'd die before you reached the tree line. Your children would die. You're staying. But your supplies, I've calculated, 90 pounds of potatoes, 40 jars of preserves, 6 weeks of flour for 2 people, 3 weeks for 7 if we're careful. We'll make it if nothing spoils. And if something does spoil—" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll make do with less." Mary closed her eyes and tried to make her breathing slow and even, but her mind was spinning with numbers she didn't fully understand, and fear she understood too well. And she thought about the lamp on the mantel and how it had flickered when the storm blew in, and she wondered if her mother was watching from somewhere, worried about them. "Papa?" she said, forgetting to pretend. Her father came to her immediately, kneeling beside her blankets on the floor, his hand warm on her forehead. "Bad dream?" "Papa, why don't we have pictures of Mama anymore?" She felt him go still. The silence stretched between them like something that might break if either of them moved, and Mary wished, desperately, with all her 6-year-old heart, that she could take the question back. "Because it hurts to look at them," her father finally said, and his voice sounded like gravel and broken glass. "Because every time I see her face, I remember that I wasn't fast enough, that I couldn't." He stopped, stood, walked to the window, and pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Hannah had not moved from her chair by the fire, but Mary could see her face in the flickering light, and the expression there was something Mary had seen before, in her own reflection, in her father's eyes, in the faces of everyone who carried a weight too heavy to set down. She knows, Mary thought. She knows what it's like to lose someone. But she did not know, not yet, what Hannah had lost, or why she was running, or what secrets she carried in the letter she touched compulsively, the letter that lived in her apron pocket like a small, dangerous animal. Vernon Burke had been the first to say it, 3 weeks before the storm, when Mary and her father had gone to town for supplies. Carson's got no business living out there alone with that child. Vernon had said to Ezra Hawkins at the general store, not bothering to lower his voice. Man shut himself off from decent folk after Martha passed. Pride like that gets people killed in winter. Mary had felt her father's hand tighten on her shoulder, had seen his jaw clench, had watched him pay for their flour and coffee in silence and walk out without responding. "Papa?" she had asked in the wagon. What did that man mean about pride? He meant nothing, her father had said. He's a small man with small thoughts, and we don't give small men space in our heads. But Mary had remembered the words anyway, the way children remember wounds even when they pretend to forget. And now, trapped in the cabin with these strangers who had blown in from the storm, she heard Vernon's voice in her memory and wondered if her father's pride was the reason they had no visitors, no friends, no light in the window to welcome people home. By the 5th day, the children had begun to thaw. Daniel, the youngest, only 5, followed Mary everywhere, asking questions in a voice that was half whisper and half wonder, as if he had forgotten that the world could contain interesting things and was just beginning to remember. "Can I be your brother?" he asked one morning, and Mary had laughed, actually laughed, a sound so unfamiliar it surprised her, and said, "You'd have to ask my papa." Emma was quieter, sitting close to Hannah most of the time, her hand always reaching for her mother's sleeve, or her mother's fingers, or her mother's hair, as if she needed constant proof that Hannah was still there. Mary recognized that need. She felt it too, every time her father left the cabin to check the animals or clear snow from the door. Jacob was the hardest to read. He watched Caleb with eyes that held something guarded and wary, and he never spoke to him directly. And Mary thought, with the strange wisdom that sometimes visited her in the night, that Jacob was protecting his mother from something, and he was not sure yet if Caleb was a threat or a shelter. On the 8th day, something changed. Caleb came in from the root cellar with his ledger in his hand and an expression on his face that Mary had not seen before, something that was not quite hope, but was not quite despair either. "Hannah," he said, and Mary noticed that he used her first name, which he had not done before. "I need to show you something." He led her down the narrow stairs to the root cellar, and Jacob arose to follow them, his protective instincts flaring, and Mary found herself following too, drawn by curiosity and something else, something she could not name. The root cellar was cool and dark and smelled of earth and potatoes and the faint sweetness of preserved fruit. Caleb lit the lantern that hung by the stairs and held it up, illuminating shelves that lined the walls, some full, some empty, some half-empty in ways that looked neglected rather than used. "I stopped preserving after Martha died," Caleb said, and his voice was flat and factual, as if he was discussing someone else's failure. Seemed pointless, keeping up a cellar for just 2 people. But now, he gestured at the supplies. "Now I need to teach you what I should have been doing all along." He showed them how to check each potato, the squeeze test, he called it, pressing gently to feel for soft spots that meant rot had started. He showed them how the jars were organized by date, oldest in front, newest in back, and how to calculate rations per person per day. 90 pounds of potatoes, he said, writing numbers in his ledger. That's 13 pounds per person for 2 weeks. 40 jars of preserves. 6 weeks of flour if we use 1 cup per person per day. We check for rot every 3 days and nothing spoils. We count, we plan, we survive. Jacob leaned forward, his suspicion fading slightly as he watched Caleb's systematic approach. "My father used to do this," he said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. "Before he..." He stopped, swallowed, did not finish. "Your father was a careful man," Caleb said, now looking up from his ledger. "I can see that in you." Jacob blinked, as if he had not expected kindness, and Mary saw something shift in his expression, something that was not quite trust, but was moving in that direction. "Mama taught me too," Hannah said quietly. "I ran a household of 9 before my husband died. I know preservation. I know rationing. I know how to stretch supplies." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Mary, watching from the stairs, thought she saw something like respect in her father's eyes, something that had not been there before. "Good," he said finally. "Then we'll do this together." That night, after the children were asleep, Mary crept to the top of the stairs and listened to her father and Hannah talking by the fire. She knew she should not eavesdrop. Her mother had always said that listening to private conversations was like reading someone's diary, a violation of trust. But she was 6 years old and frightened and desperate to understand what was happening in her small, dark world. "Mama used to teach Papa things in the kitchen," Mary whispered to herself, watching Hannah show Caleb how to check the seal in a preserve jar. Now the lady is teaching him back. He listens the same way, head tilted, eyes soft. And for the first time in 94 days, Mary felt something flutter in her chest that might have been hope. The days began to blur together, taking on a rhythm that was strange and new and almost. Mornings, chores, breakfast, lessons. Hannah had been a school teacher before her marriage, and she gathered the children around the table each day to practice letters and numbers and the careful art of handwriting. Mary loved these lessons with a fierce and secret joy, loved the feeling of the pencil in her hand, loved the praise Hannah gave when she formed her letters correctly. Afternoons, preservation, inventory, survival. Caleb and Jacob worked side by side in the root cellar, and Mary noticed that her father had begun to speak more, not much, but more than before, and that Jacob had stopped watching him with suspicious eyes. Evenings, stories, warmth, the soft crackle of the fire. Daniel would fall asleep first, usually in Mary's lap, his small body warm and trusting against hers. Emma would follow, then Jacob, and finally the adults would sit together in the firelight, talking in low voices about nothing and everything. On the 9th day, Daniel said something at dinner that made everyone laugh. "Do potatoes have feelings when we eat them?" he asked, holding up a forkful of mashed potato with an expression of genuine concern. "Because this one looks sad." Mary giggled. Emma snorted. Jacob rolled his eyes but smiled. And Caleb, her father who had not laughed in 3 years, who had forgotten the sound of joy, who had wrapped himself in silence like a shroud, Caleb laughed. It was a rusty sound, unpracticed, as if something long unused was being forced back into service, but it was real. Mary stared at her father with her mouth open, her heart pounding, tears springing to her eyes without warning. "Papa," she whispered, "you laughed." The laughter died, but something remained in its wake, a softness around Caleb's eyes, a loosening of his jaw, a tiny crack in the wall he had built around himself. "I suppose I did," he said, and he sounded surprised, as if he had not known he was still capable of such a thing. That night, late when all the children were sleeping and Mary was pretending again, she had become very good at pretending, she heard Hannah ask her father about Martha. What was she like? Silence. The fire crackled. Snow whispered against the window. "Kind," Caleb finally said. "Too kind, maybe. She never met a stranger she wouldn't feed, or a child she wouldn't comfort. She made this cabin feel like—" His voice broke, like there was always room for one more. How did she— Hannah stopped herself. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to." "Childbirth," Caleb said, and the word fell like a stone into still water. "Our second child, neither of them survived. The doctor was 47 miles away. I rode through a blizzard, but I was 3 hours too late." Mary squeezed her eyes shut against the tears that burned behind her lids. She had known this, of course. She had been 3 years old when her mother died, old enough to remember fragments, the screaming, the blood, her father's face when he came back from town with the doctor behind him, and Martha already gone. But she had never heard him say it, never heard him put the horror into words. "You blame yourself," Hannah said. It was not a question. "Every day." "Oh, Caleb." Hannah's voice was soft, almost tender. "You rode 47 miles through a blizzard. You did everything you could. I was 3 hours too late. Sometimes being too late isn't failure. Sometimes it's just life, taking things from us that we can't hold on to no matter how hard we try." Silence again. Mary barely breathed. "You sound like you know something about that," Caleb said. "I do." And then, and then, Mary heard her father ask the question she had been waiting for, the question that had been building in the cabin for 9 days like pressure before a storm. "What are you running from, Hannah?" The fire crackled, the wind moaned. Mary's heart beat so loud she was sure they could hear it. "I don't know if I can tell you," Hannah whispered. "You don't have to, but I want to. I'm so tired of carrying it alone. I'm so tired of being afraid." Her voice broke on the last word, and Mary heard fabric rustling, heard her father's boots on the floor, heard impossibly, wonderfully, the sound of Hannah crying and her father's low voice saying, "It's all right. Whatever it is, it's all right." Mary fell asleep with tears on her cheeks, and for the first time in 94 days, she did not dream of darkness. "I need to tell you something," Hannah said the next morning. It was day 10. The storm had paused briefly enough to see the sun, and the cabin felt almost bright, almost normal, almost like a place where people might actually live. Caleb nodded. "When you're ready, now, before I lose my courage again." The children were outside, Jacob and Emma helping Daniel build a snow fort while Mary watched from the porch. Bundled in every warm thing she owned, and the cabin was quiet for the first time in days, the kind of quiet that invited confessions. Hannah pulled a letter from her apron pocket. The paper was worn soft from handling, the edges frayed, the ink faded in places. She held it for a long moment, staring at it as if it might bite her. "My name isn't Hannah Smith," she said. "It's Hannah Whitfield. My husband Thomas died 8 months ago. Fever took him, fast and cruel. Left me with 3 children and a farm we couldn't save and debts we couldn't pay." She unfolded the letter and handed it to Caleb. Mary, who had crept back inside unnoticed, watched her father's face as he read, watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to something that looked almost like rage. $847 to the bank, Hannah said. $312 to the mercantile. They came with papers, legal papers, official papers, that said they could take my children, sell them as labor until the debt was paid. Jacob to the mines. Emma to domestic service. Daniel. Her voice broke. "He's only 5. They said they'd find somewhere for him. Find Esomidowere, like he was a piece of furniture to be stored." "So you ran," Caleb said. "I ran. 700 miles from Nebraska with nothing but the clothes on our backs and whatever money I could scrape together. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep my children together. And the storm caught you. The storm almost killed us." Hannah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I thought, when I collapsed in the snow, I thought that was the end. I thought I had killed my children by trying to save them." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, the letter still in his hands. When he spoke, his voice was low and controlled, but Mary heard the anger beneath it, anger that was not directed at Hannah. $847, he said. "That's what they valued your family at, less than the price of 10 cows. I know it was wrong to run. I know there must have been legal ways too. You did what any mother would do." Hannah looked up, her eyes wet, her expression uncertain. You're not going to ask me to leave? Why would I do that? Because I lied to you. Because I'm a criminal, technically. Because if those collectors find me here, they'll bring trouble to your door." Caleb set the letter down on the table and turned to face Hannah directly, and Mary saw something in his posture that she had not seen in 3 years. A straightening, a squaring, a readiness for whatever might come. "Let them come," he said. "This is Montana. A man's home is his law. And anyone who tries to take children from their mother to pay a debt—" He stopped, controlled himself. "Let them come. I'll be ready." Anna stared at him as if she was seeing him for the first time, and Mary, watching from her hiding place behind the flour barrel, thought she understood something new about her father, something she had forgotten in all the grief and silence. He was a good man. He had always been a good man. He had just forgotten, for a while, how to show it. The days after the truth felt different. It was as if a window had been opened in a room that had been closed too long, letting in light and air and something that felt almost like possibility. Anna laughed more freely now. Caleb spoke more often. The children, all 6 of them, because Mary had begun to think of Jacob and Emma and Daniel as hers in some strange and wonderful way, played together without the shadow of secrets hanging over them. On day 12, Mrs. Harlow came again with news from town. "Ezra Hawkins has lost his mind," she announced, stamping snow from her boots. "Charging $3 for flour that cost 60 cents. Refusing credit to families who've been customers for 20 years. There are people in town who are going to starve if this storm doesn't break soon." Caleb's face hardened. $3 for flour. 400% markup by my calculation. And he's got the only supplies left. The Hendersons' baby is sick and they can't afford the medicine Ezra's demanding. "A man who profits from his neighbor's desperation," Caleb said slowly, "is no neighbor at all." He went to the root cellar and came back with 2 sacks of flour and 15 jars of preserves. Anna watched with wide eyes as he loaded them onto Mrs. Harlow's sled. "Caleb, you can't. That's your supplies. Your children's supplies." "We'll make do." He straightened, his breath visible in the cold air. "Tell the Hendersons to come by if they need more. Tell anyone who needs help to come." Mrs. Harlow smiled, a warm, knowing smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Your Martha would be proud. Caleb flinched at the name, but he did not turn away this time. She'd have done the same. She'd have done more. After Mrs. Harlow left, Anna stood in the doorway, watching the sled disappear into the white distance, and Mary saw tears on her cheeks, but they were not sad tears, not exactly. "You gave away our supplies," Anna said softly. "I shared them," Caleb corrected. "There's a difference. But we only calculated enough for 7 people trying to survive alone. We didn't calculate for 7 people sharing with others." He turned to face her, and there was something in his expression that Mary had never seen before. Something that was not quite a smile, but was moving in that direction. Martha always said the math of generosity works differently than the math of scarcity. "I forgot that, for a while. I'm trying to remember." Hannah did not speak. She only reached out and touched his arm, briefly, barely, a flutter of contact that was over before it began, and walked back inside. But Mary saw her father's face after she touched him, saw the way his eyes softened and his shoulders dropped and his breath caught in his throat, and she thought, with the sudden certainty that sometimes came to children who were paying attention, that something was changing in this cabin, something good and strange and terrifying and beautiful. On day 14, Vernon Burke's voice came back to haunt them. Not Vernon himself. He was trapped in town like everyone else, the roads impassable. But his words, carried by Mrs. Harlow during one of her visits, reached the cabin like poison seeping through the walls. "They're talking in town," Mrs. Harlow said quietly, pulling Hannah aside while Caleb checked the animals. "Vernon's been spreading rumors." "About you?" "About Caleb." "What kind of rumors?" Mrs. Harlow looked pained. "That you're his mistress. That your children are. that there are no wedding papers, no proper introductions, no explanation for why you're here. Hannah's face went white. Oh God, I've told everyone who'll listen that the storm brought you here, that Caleb did the Christian thing by taking you in. But Vernon's got a loud voice and a mean spirit, and people listen to him more than they should. That night, after the children were asleep, Mary watched from her place on the stairs as Hannah told Caleb what Mrs. Harlow had said. She saw her father's face go still and cold, saw his hands clench into fists at his sides, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. Vernon Burke is a small man with small thoughts, he said, repeating the words he had told Mary months ago. We don't give small men space in our heads. But Mary, Hannah whispered, they're talking about your daughter. What will people say about her when she grows up? If they think... They won't think anything. Because I'll tell them the truth. What truth? That I lied about my name? That I'm running from debt collectors? That will only make things worse. Then I'll tell them a different truth. Caleb's voice was hard now, determined. That you're a widow who did whatever she had to do to protect her children. That you're decent and honest and brave. That anyone who judges you for surviving is not worth the breath it takes to argue with them. Hannah stared at him, her eyes bright with tears. Why are you defending me like this? You barely know me. I know enough. You know nothing. You know a woman who stumbled into your cabin half frozen and lied about her name and brought trouble to your door. I know a woman who rode 700 miles to save her children. I know a woman who taught my daughter to smile again. I know a woman who, he stopped, swallowed, seemed to be fighting something inside himself. I know a woman I want to keep knowing. The silence that followed was so thick Mary could almost taste it. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound, her heart pounding, her whole body trembling with something she could not name. The storm will break soon, Hannah finally said. When it does, I should go. You should stay. Caleb, stay. It was not a question. It was not quite a demand. It was something in between, a request, a hope, a door opening in the darkness. Hannah did not answer. She only turned away, her shoulders shaking, and disappeared into the loft where she and Emma slept. Mary stayed on the stairs for a long time, watching her father sit alone by the dying fire, and she thought about lamps that flickered to life, and doors that blew open, and all the strange and wonderful things that could happen when you stopped hiding from the world. On day 20, the storm broke. It happened suddenly, the way storms sometimes do. One moment the wind was howling and the snow was flying, and the next moment there was silence and stillness and a pale wash of winter sunlight creeping through the windows. Mary pressed her face to the glass and stared at a world transformed. The snow lay in drifts taller than her father, sculpted by the wind into shapes that looked almost alive. The sky was the color of old linen, and somewhere in the distance she could see smoke rising from town chimneys. Roads will be passable by tomorrow, Caleb said. Hannah nodded but did not speak. That afternoon they had visitors. Vernon Burke came first, riding out from town on a borrowed horse with 2 other men behind him. Mary watched them approach from the window, her stomach tightening with dread. Inside, her father said, and his voice was hard in a way she had not heard before. All of you. But Mary did not go inside. She stayed on the porch, hidden behind the woodpile, watching as the 3 men dismounted and approached her father with expressions that were not friendly. Carson, Vernon said, we came to check on you. Did you? Storm's been hard. Town's been talking. We thought we'd make sure you hadn't. He paused, his eyes sliding to the cabin door, to the children's faces pressed against the window. Gotten yourself into any trouble? The only trouble I see, Caleb said, is standing in my yard. Vernon's face reddened. The 2 men behind him shifted uncomfortably. The whole town's talking, Caleb. Vernon's voice rose, carrying clearly to the porch, to the window, to the children listening with wide eyes. They say you got a mistress living under your roof. 3 bastard children calling you Papa. Think about your daughter, man. Think about what people will say about Mary when she grows up." Mary felt the words hit her like stones, felt her face burn with shame she did not understand, felt something twist in her chest that might have been grief or rage or both. Inside the cabin, she heard Emma start to cry. Heard Jacob's voice high and furious, "Don't talk about my mother that way." And then her father spoke, and his voice was colder than the winter that had just broken, colder than anything Mary had ever heard. "Get off my land, Vernon. All 3 of you. And don't come back until you remember what decency looks like. 14 years I've been your neighbor. 14 years I've bought supplies from your store and nodded to you at church and kept my opinions about your small mind and smaller heart to myself. That ends today. Now see here. You got 30 seconds. Vernon's face went through several colors, red to purple to white, and for a moment Mary thought he might try to argue, might try to stand his ground, might try to make things worse. But something in Caleb's posture must have warned him, because he turned without another word and mounted his horse and rode away, his companions following close behind. Mary stayed behind the woodpile for a long time after they left, her whole body shaking, her mind spinning with the terrible words Vernon had said, and the even more terrible fear that maybe somehow he was right. Hannah was packing when Mary found her. Not packing much. They had come with almost nothing, but gathering the few things they had accumulated over 20 days. The pencils Mary had shared, the slate Emma used for practice, the small wooden horse Daniel had carved with Jacob's help. "The lady's leaving," Mary said, standing in the doorway with tears streaming down her face. "Papa, the lady is leaving." Caleb appeared behind her, his expression unreadable. "Is that true?" Hannah did not look up. "I have to. You heard what Vernon said. The whole town thinks, and your daughter, your poor daughter. I don't care what the town thinks. You should. You have to live here. You have to raise Mary here. And if people believe, let them believe. Let them whisper and gossip and say whatever they want. I know the truth. My daughter knows the truth. And the truth is that you're a good woman who made difficult choices to protect her children, and I would rather have you here, being judged by small-minded fools, than lose you to their cruelty." Hannah finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "Why? Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" "Because my daughter laughs again when you're here. Because my cabin feels like a home instead of a grave. Because—" He stopped, struggled, seemed to be pulling words from somewhere deep and painful. "Because you remind me that there are things worth living for beyond guilt and grief. Because I had forgotten how to feel anything. And you and your children, you woke something up in me that I thought was dead." Mary held her breath. Hannah's hands stilled on the small bundle she was packing. "I can't stay," she whispered. "The debt collectors, we'll fight them together. The town, we'll face them together. Your reputation, I don't care about my reputation. I care about my de-editor." His voice cracked on the word, and Mary saw something she had never seen before, tears in her father's eyes. "I care about these children who have become part of my family. I care about you, Hannah. God help me. I care more than I know how to say." The cabin was silent except for the sound of the fire crackling and the wind whispering against the windows, and Mary's own heart beating so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. "I'm scared," Hannah finally said. "I'm so scared of wanting something good and having it taken away." "So am I." "Then how do you—" "We stay scared together. We stay anyway." Hannah laughed, a broken, watery sound that was half sob and half something else, something that might have been hope. "You make it sound so simple. It's not simple. It's the hardest thing in the world. But it's the only thing worth doing." Mary could not stay silent any longer. She ran across the room and threw her arms around Hannah's legs. pressing her face into the rough wool of her skirt. "Please stay," she said, her voice muffled. "Please, please stay. I don't want it to be dark again." Hannah's hand came down to rest on Mary's hair, stroking gently, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Oh, dear child. Oh, my dear, dear child." And Mary knew, with the certainty that sometimes came to children who had seen too much and loved too hard, that Hannah was going to stay. Mrs. Harlow came the next day with a drawing. "Mary gave me this to give to Hannah," she said, handing over a piece of paper that Mary recognized immediately, the one she had made 2 nights ago, using her last good pencil and a sheet of her father's precious letter paper. It showed 2 families standing together outside a cabin, Caleb and Mary on one side, Anna and her 3 children on the other. In the middle, she had drawn a lamp with wavy lines coming off it to show light. At the top, in her best 6-year-old handwriting, she had written, "Hewam." Hannah looked at the drawing for a long moment, her expression shifting through emotions too fast to name. When she looked up, there were tears on her cheeks. "She spelled it wrong," she said. "She spelled it exactly right," Mrs. Harlow replied. "That child knows what home means better than most adults I've met." That evening, while the children played outside in the finely still air, Mrs. Harlow sat with Caleb and Hannah by the fire and said the things that needed saying. "Running didn't save you before, Hannah. What makes you think it will save you now?" She held up a hand before Hannah could respond. "I've lived in this territory for 40 years. I've seen women run from troubles and women face them down, and I can tell you which ones slept better at night. But the debt can be negotiated, can be paid over time, can be fought in courts if the collectors overstep their bounds, and from what you've told me, they absolutely did. Children cannot be sold as labor without proper procedures, and threatening to separate them without legal standing is grounds for complaint. I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. You were terrified and alone and doing your best. But you're not alone anymore." Mrs. Harlow's voice softened. "You have people now, dear. People who will stand with you." Anna looked at Caleb. "Is that true? Would you really?" "Yes. One word. No hesitation." Mrs. Harlow smiled, a warm, knowing smile that made her weathered face look almost young. "I told you, Caleb. Opening your door feeds the soul. Your Martha was right about that, same as she was right about most things." This time, Caleb did not flinch at his wife's name. He only nodded slowly and reached across the space between chairs to take Hannah's hand in his. Mary, watching from the doorway with Daniel drowsing against her shoulder, felt something bloom in her chest, something warm and bright and terrifying and beautiful. Hope. It felt like hope. Sunday came clear and cold, the first day since the storm that the roads were truly passable, and Caleb loaded the wagon before dawn. "We're going to church," he announced. Hannah's face went pale. "Caleb, after what Vernon said, we're going to church. All of us, together. Let them look, let them whisper, let them think whatever they want to think. And then I'm going to stand up and tell them the truth." Mary, dressed in her best dress, the blue one with the white collar that her mother had sewn before she died, and helped Emma with her braids, and tried not to think about what might happen when they walked into that church. The ride to town took almost 2 hours. The children were quiet, sensing the adults' tension, and even Daniel, who usually chattered constantly, sat still and silent in Hannah's lap. The church was already full when they arrived. Mary saw heads turn as they walked in, saw whispers pass from pew to pew like wind through wheat, saw Vernon Burks smirk from his place near the front. Caleb led them to an empty pew on the left side. Mary sat between her father and Hannah, holding both their hands, trying to breathe normally, trying not to cry. The service began. The minister read from the Bible, something about strangers and hospitality and the importance of kindness, and Mary wondered if it was deliberate, If someone had told him what had happened, if he was trying to make a point? And then, just before the final hymn, Caleb stood. The church went silent. The minister stopped mid-sentence. Every eye turned to face the man who had hidden himself away for 3 years and was now standing before them with a woman no one knew and children no one recognized. "Most of you know me," Caleb said, his voice steady, carrying to every corner of the small wooden building. "Most of you knew my wife Martha. You know I've been absent since she died. You know I closed my door in my heart and pretended the world didn't exist." Whispers, shifting bodies. Vernon Burke's smirk widening. 3 weeks ago, a blizzard brought a woman and her children to my door. Her name is Hannah Whitfield. She's a widow. Her husband Thomas died 8 months ago of fever, leaving her with 3 children and debts she couldn't pay. The debt collectors came with papers, legal papers, they said, that would let them take her children and sell them as labor. Gasps now, shocked faces, Vernon's smirk fading. She ran 700 miles from Nebraska with nothing but the clothes on her back and whatever money she could scrape together. She ran because she's a mother, and mothers protect their children, and any one of you would have done the same. Caleb's voice rose, not angry but fierce, filled with a conviction that Mary had not heard in 3 years. $847. That's what they valued her family at. Less than the price of 10 cows. They wanted to send her 12-year-old son to the mines, her 8-year-old daughter to domestic service, her 5-year-old, they said they'd find somewhere for him. Like he was furniture, like he was property, like he was not a Sid with a soul and a mother who loves him. The whispers had stopped. The church was utterly silent. "I've heard the rumors," Caleb continued. "I've heard what Vernon Burke has been saying, that Hannah is my mistress, that her children are illegitimate, that I brought shame to this community." He looked directly at Vernon, his gaze hard and unblinking. "Those are lies, and the man who spread them knows they're lies. He came to my home and spoke those words in front of my daughter, my 6-year-old daughter, and I will never forgive him for that." Vernon's face had gone white. He looked like a man who had expected to win and was suddenly realizing he had lost. "But I didn't stand up to attack Vernon Burke. I stood up to tell you the truth about Hannah Whitfield." Caleb's voice softened now, the anger draining away, leaving something more vulnerable in its place. "My wife died 3 years ago. I thought I would never feel warmth again. I locked my door, shuttered my windows, let the lamp go dark. I was waiting to die too, not from anything dramatic, just from the slow fade of not caring anymore." Mary felt tears on her cheeks. She squeezed her father's hand as hard as she could. "This woman and her children didn't just shelter in my home. They brought it back to life. My daughter laughs again. I laugh again. There's light in the window and food on the table and something that feels almost like family." He took a breath. "If that makes me a fool, then I'm proud to be one. If caring about strangers who needed help is shameful, then I'll wear that shame like a badge. And if anyone in this room wants to judge Hannah Whitfield for surviving, for protecting her children, for doing whatever she had to do to keep her family together, then you'll have to go through me first." Silence. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Mrs. Harlow stood up. Her voice was clear and strong despite her 68 years. "Hannah Whitfield is welcome in this community. Her children will attend our school. Anyone who says otherwise answers to me." Another woman stood, Mrs. Henderson, whose baby had been sick, whose family Caleb had given flour to during the storm. And to me. Then another, and another. 7 people, then 12, then most of the congregation all standing, all facing the front of the church with expressions that ranged from sheepish to determined to openly moved. The minister cleared his throat. It seems, he said slowly, that this community has something to say about how we treat our neighbors. I think perhaps we should take up a collection, not for the church this time, but for the Whitfield family, to help with the debts that drove them here. Money began to appear, coins and small bills, some of them clearly all that people had to give. Mary watched in wonder as the collection plate filled, as strangers she barely knew reached into their pockets and their hearts and gave what they could. When it was counted, the total came to $127. Not enough to pay the debt, not even close. But it was a start. The weeks that followed felt like a dream, the good kind, the kind you never wanted to wake up from. Hannah stopped talking about leaving. The children settled into routines, attending school when the roads were clear, helping with chores when they weren't. Caleb smiled more, spoke more, seemed to grow taller somehow, as if he had been hunched under a weight that was finally lifting. And Mary was happier than she had been since before her mother died. She had siblings now, sort of. Daniel followed her everywhere, calling her Mary Mary in a sing-song voice that should have been annoying but was actually the most wonderful sound in the world. Emma became her confidant, whispering secrets in the dark, giggling about nothing. Even Jacob, serious, protective Jacob, had started to treat her like a little sister, ruffling her hair and teasing her about her spelling. But the thing that made Mary happiest was the lamp. It burned now. Every evening as the sun went down, her father would light it, deliberately, almost ceremonially, and set it in the window so that anyone passing would see the warm glow against the cold dark. "Why do you light it now?" Mary asked one evening. "Because your mother was right," Caleb said. "Light invites people in, and I'm ready for people again." "Because of the lady?" "Because of you. Because of them." "Because of—" He stopped, seemed to be searching for words. "Because being alone was safe, but being together is better. Even when it's harder. Even when it's scary. Being together is always better." Mary nodded as if she understood. Maybe she did, a little. "Papa?" "Yes?" "Are you going to marry the lady?" Caleb choked on nothing, his face going red, and Mary giggled at his expression. That's not, we haven't. Daniel says you look at her the way his papa used to look at his mama. Before his papa got sick. Daniel is 5 years old. Daniel is very smart." Caleb did not respond. But Mary saw the way his eyes drifted to the loft where Hannah was putting Emma to bed, saw the softness in his expression, and she smiled to herself in the firelight. On the last day before spring, Caleb took Jacob to the barn for a lesson. Mary followed, of course. She followed her father everywhere these days and sat on a hay bale to watch. "Preservation," Caleb said, showing Jacob how to smoke meat properly. "Your father probably taught you some of this before he passed." "A little, not much. He was always—" Jacob's voice caught. "He was always planning to teach me more. He said there was time. There's never as much time as we think." They worked in silence for a while, the smoke rising in curling tendrils, the smell sharp and strange and somehow comforting. "Can I ask you something?" Jacob finally said. "Anything. Are you going to—" He struggled, clearly embarrassed. "My mother. Do you care about her?" Caleb stopped what he was doing and looked at Jacob directly. "Yes. Like, care? The way a man cares about a woman?" "Yes." Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My father was a good man. I believe you. If you and my mother, I need to know you're going to be good to her. I need to know you won't hurt her." "I won't." "How do I know that?" "You don't." Caleb set down the knife he had been using and turned to face Jacob fully. "You don't know. You can't know. Trust isn't something you know. It's something you build piece by piece over time. All I can do is show you, day after day, that I mean what I say. And all you can do is watch and decide for yourself whether to believe me Jacob considered this for a long time. "My father used to say something," he finally said, "about how you measure a man. What did he say? You keep enough for your family. Then you keep a little more for whoever might need your door. He said that's how you know someone's got a good heart. Not by what they keep, but by what they're willing to give away." Caleb was silent. Mary saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been recognition or grief or maybe both. "Your father was wise," he said quietly. "I'd like to think he and I would have been friends." "I think so too." They went back to work, and Mary watched them with tears in her eyes that she did not try to hide. Her father was teaching Jacob to preserve meat, but he was also teaching him something else, something about trust and patience and the slow, careful work of building a family from broken pieces. And Jacob was learning. They both were. Vern and Bert came back on the first day of spring, but this time he came alone, and he did not come with accusations. Mary watched from the porch as he dismounted his horse and walked toward the cabin, his hat in his hands, his posture nothing like the arrogant swagger he had worn before. Caleb met him in the yard. They spoke for several minutes, too quietly for Mary to hear, and she watched her father's face shift her surprise and suspicion, and finally something that might have been cautious acceptance. Vernon handed him something, a bundle of some kind, and remounted his horse. But before he rode away, he stopped and looked back. "I was wrong about her," he said, his voice carrying clearly now. "Wrong about you too, Caleb. Maybe we all got so used to protecting what's ours, we forgot that's how people die out here, alone. Figured I'd start remembering." He rode away without waiting for a response. Caleb stood in the yard for a long moment, looking at the bundle in his hands. When he came inside, Mary saw that it contained $43 in cash and goods, Vernon's contribution to Hannah's debt. "Oh my," Hannah whispered. "People can change," Caleb said. "Sometimes it takes them a while. Sometimes they need to see something that shakes them up. But they can change." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought—" After what he said, neither did I. That evening after dinner, Caleb asked Hannah to walk with him. Mary watched them go from the window, her heart pounding. She saw them stop near the fence her mother had helped build years ago, and she saw her father take Hannah's hands in his. She could not hear what they were saying, but she saw Hannah's face, saw the tears streaming down her cheeks, saw her nod, once, twice, 3 times, and then saw her father pull her close, his arms wrapped around her, his face buried in her hair. "What's happening?" Daniel asked, appearing at Mary's elbow. "Something good," Mary whispered. "Something really, really good." The wedding happened in summer, when the wildflowers were blooming and the air smelled like hope. It was a simple ceremony, just the family and Mrs. Harlow and a few others who had become friends over the spring, but Mary thought it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Hannah wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, soft blue like the summer sky. Caleb wore his best shirt, the one Martha had sewn for him before Mary was born. The children stood together in a line, Mary and Jacob and Emma and Daniel, holding hands, grinning at each other with the barely contained joy of people who had been afraid and were finally safe. When the minister asked if anyone objected, Mary shouted "No!" so loudly that everyone laughed, even Caleb, even Hannah, even Jacob, who rarely laughed at anything. "Well then," the minister said, smiling, "I suppose that settles it." After the ceremony, after the food and the dancing and the congratulations, Mary found her father alone on the porch, looking out at the land that stretched toward the mountains. "Papa?" "Yes, Mary. Are you happy?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached down and lifted her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. "I am," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "I am happy, Mary. For the first time in a very long time, I am happy." Because of Hannah? Because of everything. Because of you. Because of Jacob and Emma and Daniel. Because of this family we've built from pieces that didn't seem to fit together. He pressed his forehead against hers. Your mother would have loved Hannah. She would have loved all of them. She would have been so proud of the home we've made. Mary felt tears on her cheeks, but they were good tears, the kind that came from joy rather than grief. I miss Mama, she whispered. So do I, every day. But loving new people doesn't mean we love her less. It means we have more love to give. Your mother understood that. She had more love in her heart than anyone I've ever known. Is that why you married Hannah? Because you have more love? Partly. He smiled, a real smile, wide and bright and full of something Mary had not seen in 3 years. Mostly I married her because she makes me want to be the man your mother thought I could be. The man I forgot how to be after she died. Mary thought about this for a moment. That's a good reason, she decided. I think so too. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Mary crept downstairs to look at the lamp. It was burning bright, casting warm amber light across the cabin, making shadows dance on the walls and ceiling. Through the window, she could see stars, thousands of them, scattered across the dark like spilled sugar, and the distant silhouette of the mountains her mother had loved. Mama, she whispered, I hope you can see us. I hope you know that Papa is happy again. I hope you know that we're okay. The lamp flickered, just once, just a tiny tremor of light that might have been a draft from the window, or might have been something else entirely. Mary smiled. Good night, Mama. I love you. She climbed back up the stairs to her bed, her new bed, the one she shared with Emma now, in a room that felt full rather than empty, and closed her eyes. And in the morning, when she woke to the sound of laughter and the smell of breakfast and the chaotic joy of a house full of children, she looked at the lamp one more time. It was still burning. The lamp stays lit now, Papa, she said at breakfast, not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because you said home should always look like someone's waiting. Caleb set down his coffee cup and looked at his daughter. His fierce and brave and wonderfully strange daughter, and his eyes filled with tears. That's exactly right, Mary, that's exactly right. And outside, in the wide Montana sky, the sun rose over mountains that had seen 1,000 storms and 1,000 springs and would see 1,000 more. And somewhere, maybe closer than anyone knew, a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands smiled at the family she had left behind and whispered a blessing on the home they had built together. Home isn't a place you find. It's a door someone opens and a choice to stay. The end.